We're going to talk more about the ceasefire from the Russian angle now with analyst Mark Temnycky, who joins me from Washington. Mark, thank you for taking the time to join us. I mean, we heard about 12 hours of talks between Russia and the U.S. Is that a good sign or a bad sign?
No one knows. First of all, thank you again for having me. It's a pleasure to be back on. This is something that analysts are trying to determine because the Russians have been speaking with the Americans on several occasions, but there's also much skepticism with how the ceasefire will move forward. For example, as your colleague was mentioning, the Russians are meeting with the United States to discuss a ceasefire, and at the same time, they are launching multiple drone strikes, not on military abilities that Ukraine has, but on civilian and energy areas within Ukraine, and they're targeting men, women, and children. And that doesn't sound like a country that's interested in having a ceasefire.
And we're also hearing Russian reports that say Russia wants to open up these talks to other countries and to the UN. What would be behind that move?
It's an interesting development, as the Russians have previously stated that they don't want other countries involved. And the Russians are very well aware that numerous UN resolutions have been passed since the full-scale invasion in February of 2022, condemning the Russian Federation. This is a very strong international support for Ukraine, and many of these United Nations countries, whether they be in the traditional Western sense of Europe and the United States, but several other countries throughout South America, Africa, and Asia, and Oceania also support Ukraine. And there will be discussions on further Ukrainian support, potentially even sending troops to the contact line within Ukraine to help the Ukrainians defend themselves against potential future Russian attacks. So it's odd that the Russians would invite other countries around knowing that they do not support Russia and what it's doing in its war.
And what's interesting, I mean, the U.S. has been the go-between, at least in this round of ceasefire talks. I guess my question is the U.S. the right negotiating partner, especially given these latest comments from top Trump officials slamming Europe via that group chat chain that looped in a journalist?
What's very odd as well is not only has the United States had these conversations separately with Ukraine and with Russia, no European representation has been invited to any of these talks. And Ukraine is a country within Europe. Ukraine is a country that wants to be integrated with various European organizations, such as the European Union. And the Europeans feel that they should also be present. So while it is important that the war does end, it seems like the United States is trying to rush forward some sort of peace agreement without considering future possibilities. And having European representation is very important, not only for Ukraine, but also for European security and what this could mean on the way forward. So the Europeans, I think, as well as the United Kingdom, would be better positioned because this country is within Europe and it impacts them as well.
And just to remind everyone, these talks at the moment are really just about hammering out a partial pause in the war, a 30-day ceasefire. If it's been such a struggle to even get to this limited ceasefire point, do you ever see the two sides getting to a full ceasefire agreement? And if so, how?
It is possible, but that is a long ways away. And unfortunately, there are numerous historic events where Russia has violated ceasefires previously. For example, in the invasion of Georgia in August 2008, there was a ceasefire saying that the Russians had to withdraw their military presence in the provinces of Abkhazia and South Ossetia in Georgia. That was 2008. It is now 2025, and the Russians still have a military presence within Georgia. And then similarly, during the first invasion of Ukraine in the Donbass in April of 2014, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe created ceasefire agreements saying that the Russians had to withdraw their troops and military presence within eastern Ukraine, and 8 years later that led to the full-scale invasion. So understandably so, there's a lot of skepticism from the Ukrainians as well as the Europeans that a deal currently cannot be reached with the Russians. And then most recently, the Russians last week said that they would be open to having a ceasefire in energy infrastructure, and several hours after that conversation with the United States, they launched drone attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
Mark, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us. That's Mark Temnycky from Washington. Thank you.
Thank you again.